Today we're talking about Camazotz. As you can see here, his actual in-game model has already been shown in the most recent patch notes. Also, quite a lot about his abilities has been leaked, so we can get a decent chunk of information on that as well. I am extremely hyped for this god. I'm as hyped for this god as I originally was for Izanami when I thought she was an assassin, and that's because of this footage, we can almost certainly say that Camazotz is gonna be an assassin. Why? Well, first look at the bottom corner here. The only god in this team, the only god in the game on this side of the map is Camazotz. On the other side we have the Odin bots. And as such, the stats that are shown in the bottom left are very, very likely to belong to Camazotz himself. The sign here are two crossed swords which indicate a physical character, while a magical character would have this kind of magical blue star there. But not only that, we can also see his base stats. And if you look at these base stats, they are the typical ones for an assassin. He's starting with 40 physical power, he's got 17 physical protection, 31 magical protection, 330 movement speed, and 1.02 attack speed. These stats are almost the same as Thor's. Thor has 1 more power and 0.1 less attack speed. Other than that, it's completely identical stats. Susanoo has similar stats as well, with a little less movement speed because he's got this passive, and otherwise completely equal stats once again. And if you look at Hunters, the only other physical class that I would say could really an option here, you have stats like 43 power and you often have less than 1 point something attack speed. Only very few Hunters go to 370 movement speed even. So overall, or even the defense on the physical side is usually lower on Hunters by 1, 2, or 3. So there's not much of an indication that would say that he could be a Hunter. And also, obviously, he doesn't have any kind of projectile thing. He obviously just has his claws, so Hunters are out of the picture. Now, if you look at Warriors, the stats are generally a little more similar. However, almost all Warriors start with 19 protections or more. The only exception being Tyr, because he's getting more protections from his abilities later on. All the others usually start with 20 or 21, some with 19, sometimes even more. So they really do not start with 17 protections. So if Camazotz was to be a warrior, he would be the one with the lowest protection in the game and otherwise very similar stats. So that doesn't really make sense, and his design here does not indicate that he would be a warrior. So while we don't have absolute confirmation, I am 99% certain now that Camazotz is gonna be an assassin. What we know about his abilities indicates a similar direction as well. His name is Deadly God of Bats, which is ironic because Camazotz translated actually just means Death Bat. Could have made that a little more simple. And we're gonna look at the abilities one by one, starting with the passive. The passive is Essence Pool. It's some kind of healing. It somehow interacts with other skills, maybe even the ultimate. Somehow, I guess, dealing damage heals you in a way, which would make very much sense with the vampire concept. We don't have any proof of that, any absolute explanation there, but it seems to somehow come back to the passive. He also has a skill called Camazotz Essence, which is a deployable, and there were earlier iterations where this skill didn't even exist, so I feel like it might have been a change there. Maybe this is the new one, maybe that somehow works with the passive, or maybe it's just something that plays into the passive. And then we have the old ability one, which is Screech Echo, where Camazotz buffs himself and does some kind of sound waves echo. We've actually seen this for a very brief time when he accidentally was released with a Fenrir model, and he had these 3 projectiles going into different directions and then bouncing back. So maybe this echo is still in the model, maybe it's not. We're not entirely sure about that. And we have ability number 2, Vampire Bats, which has not been changed in a way that it was not the second ability anymore. It just has seen 2 iterations. The first one was that it was a projectile ability and a stun. So you probably send out some bats and they stun someone. Then it seems to have been changed to a slow and damage over time. So I'm assuming that the stun may no longer be in place because of the slow, or that the slow leads into a stun, similar to Kronos, something like that. And maybe the damage over time applies first. We will see how exactly it works out, but something along those lines. Ability number 3 is Siphon Power. It has a Siphon Power beam, whatever that may mean, and a Siphon Mark. I assume this once again could somehow work in combination with this passive, with this healing. Maybe if somebody's marked, you will heal more from them or something like that. something along those lines. And he has an AoE effect on that ability, so it's probably a small radius or something like that, given that we assumed he's probably an assassin. And then we have the ultimate, and the ultimate is Deadly Bite. Originally, the information about this was just, it's a buff, it has some kind of heal pool and some kind of essence pool, but a lot of this sounds more like it's part of the passive. And then that was completely overhauled. Now there is something that was in between stated as old, as maybe potentially unused, but now it's back to not being considered old, but just being the ability that it is. The description is as follows. Camazotz flies straight up, then it chooses a ground target and latches onto the closest enemy, silencing them and damaging over time while healing himself. Camazotz takes reduced damage while channeling, but if he takes 25% of his HP, he is knocked off early. If he channels for the full duration, he is healed, and enemy guards under 15% HP when the channel finishes will be executed. In my opinion, that's quite a lot of information to take in, but we have a reference source here. Arachne used to have a similar ability to that. Arachne would go onto a target and clutch onto them from close range only, drain some health from them, and actually I think heal herself at the same time, and then eventually jump off, or you could knock her off with crouch control. Maybe that's the case for Camazotz as well. Maybe he's CC immune, it doesn't say anything about that, either of those. So it says he flies straight up, so I'm assuming he will have some air mechanics similar to Thor or Ratatosker or Aokwang first. Or maybe it's just a small leap, but I'm assuming the first. Then he has the same thing as Arachne, where he clutches onto an enemy and also silences them, so they can probably not fight back all too well. He heals himself. I think, given how he supposedly clutches onto the enemy, they will not be able to attack him directly, so somebody else has to be around to damage him in order to make sure that Camazotz drops off and does not get his execute off and stuff like that. So it's kind of a team play workaround against this ability, I guess. We don't know what Beats does though. Maybe Beats takes him off you completely. Then after the channeling is done, Camazotz is healed, so apparently he has to get the full thing off to heal. And the execute may happen if the enemy is low enough. So that's, in my opinion, a really interesting ability. A very one-target specific assassin ability. A bit awkward because I think you kind of take away a lot of your mobility. A lot of the mobility is in the ultimate from what it sounds like. And typically those are the abilities you want to use to engage with. Camazotz is something you're looking to execute with. So what you're going to do is you're going to engage with other abilities and then drop down onto the target when he's really low. So if this ability has a long wind up, it's going to be really awkward and you really need to be good at hitting it and not getting interrupted while doing so. The ability itself deals a lot of damage as well. It starts with 200 damage and then scales up all the way to 800 damage plus 100% scaling. The ability costs 100 mana and has a 90-second cooldown. For reference, because these values can sound quite high, Naja has kind of a similar ultimate that's, in my opinion, harder to interrupt because you can't just deal damage to him to cancel it. And he will deal 300 damage plus 230% scaling on the lowest rank, assuming he crits on all 3 hits. And that damage goes up to 940 plus 230% scaling. So Naja gets a lot more scaling damage off than Camazotz does in his ult. And he has higher base damage. At the same time, obviously, the benefit of Camazotz's ult here is that it's also an execute. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to get the full channel done and not get interrupted meanwhile. And then, in the process of that, execute the enemy. Now, a lot of the efficiency of this ability depends on the amount of time it takes for him to deal that damage, and if he can use stuff like that. For example, if he's able to use beats at the same time, or if he's CC immune in the first place, then the ability will be a lot stronger than if he's not. If he's easy to interrupt while doing it, then it might be a weaker ability. This may also be the reason why it was at least in between considered old or unused, and we will see if it actually makes it into the game, but it would definitely be a very interesting mechanic, and so far it seems like that will be the case. As a last bit of additional info, Camazotz will already see his first skin in the Odyssey. He will get a Jurassic skin, so probably some kind of dinosaur reference. I've been saying that this could potentially be like a pterodactyl or maybe some kind of raptor with the feathers and stuff like that. Anything that can fly a little bit or pretend to fly and be kind of dinosaur themed. That's all the info we have for now. The rest should come next week when we get the patch notes for the god. And after that, obviously, the release a week after on a Tuesday, as usual. Also, a lot of the information used in this video was from the Smite data mining site, so shoutouts to Ferreo for allowing me to use that data. The link for the site and the patch notes, spoils, or data mining is down below. With that, thank you guys for watching. See you for the next video tomorrow. SLOTH out.